Just waiting for our rig to load. This is another, I had to look at the sign, Esoterror podcast with Delane and Adam. And today we're reaching out to you on just a particular conversation that we had recently regarding basic human relationships. Delane, take it away.
So, left off on after that, Adam started getting into it, and due to me having to leave, we cut the conversation short, but it left it open for this conversation in this podcast where Adam was talking about interaction versus transaction. Now, I didn't get a chance to look up the definitions. I don't know if you want to bring them up on the computer so we could go over that with the viewer before we get into our discussion.
That's what that stands for, right? WWW stands for Worldwide Wiggly.
World Wide Web.
Okay, yeah, I was thinking
the interweb.
I was way off.
By the way, the interdimensional bling. Adam coined that phrase in our first podcast based off of me saying interdimensional beings, and I said interdimensional bling. Don't worry, guys. We're coming up with ideas to try to bring you more interdimensional bling, and it's something that we actually want to do. And obviously we want to start off with the shirts, the hats, the stickers, things like that. But we want to work into like jewelry, necklaces, bracelets, earrings, any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we're going to get on it. Like, I've been itching for wood burning. One of my buddies years previous never wore any silver or precious gems or metals, but he always had like wood jewelry, wood earrings, and wood necklaces, and I just always thought it was kind of the coolest thing ever. And so I kind of want to get on that bandwagon. I have a pyrography set so that we could like do some wood burnings and stuff and make some pretty cool items. It's a little in the ether and in the wind right now, but we'll get around to it. So yeah, what we're talking about is the difference between human interaction and human transaction. And there are a lot of things that I want to uncork regarding this concept. Is that it's something that I have kind of witnessed and struggled with my whole life, is that I simply didn't have the language for understanding what was happening. Is that I was always somebody that was oversharing. And I do mean like not giving people the deepest, darkest insights into my soul necessarily, although I'm guilty of that as well. I mean actually oversharing. When I was a kid, I'd get a board game. I remember one instance, it was the Where in the USA is Carmen Sandiego? And it taught you all kind of cool historical facts about, whatever state, and you would kind of engage yourself in resolving mysteries as to where Carmen Sandiego or whatever villain it was in whatever particular state by learning actual historical models. And so one of my best friends at the time, a friend of the family's daughter, came over, and I just rushed up to her with this board game, like, we got to play, it's the greatest thing ever. And she was like, yo, whoa, like, what the fuck? Like, that was an interaction that didn't exactly work out for me. And then it kind of stuck with me throughout the rest of my life, is that whereas I was always having human interactions, everybody else, although seemingly to come from, say, trust issues or verification protocol, is that they weren't engaging in human interaction, they were engaging in human transaction, as though there are a tit for tat, back and forth kind of like if I expose or share some aspect of my ego, having nothing to do with self-confidence, but identity, ego, or whatever, then you placate and purchase a part of my ego in that exchange, that transaction. Whereas I was honestly just hitting everything on its head, like going straight to the core, an exposed nerve, looking for interactions. I wasn't able to get beyond anybody else's confirmation protocol of this kind of a game. Like in Judaism, they give their kids gelt, I think it's called, which is a way that they learn to understand markets of exchange. It's like play money, right? And that's what I feel like the majority of human relationships has been kind of like soaked and saturated in a human transaction, as opposed to, and the human transaction shields you from a true human interaction. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing by default, because it means that you are discovering somebody and you are qualifying them. It's almost like an interview. This is what we associate with dates, especially, is that it feels like an interview because you were engaged in this market of exchange of transaction. I guess that I'm just too lazy and never really had that mathematical side of my brain properly developed as to where I just go straight to I'm curious as to who you are, where you're from, what do you like? Like I'm not there's none of this facade in between that interaction.
Yeah, so a deeper understanding of people, which is what I like too. Adam, you were mentioning like a purchase and what you were explaining when they were basically like purchasing a part of your ego. Would you relate that more to like for the viewer, I guess, as like if you're at the grocery store and the transaction with the relationship is more like the transaction at a grocery store with your clerk, you know, is basically what I'm taking away from that.
Yeah.
Your explanation of the transaction, you know, where it's just very shallow, not very deep, and it's more like a thing like a chore as opposed to something that we want to do, that we're engaging because we want to learn about this person.
Right. I think that probably the best example of a transaction, a personal human transaction, is gossip. You know that when gossip begins, then there is a momentum that happens between people. There is a curiosity, there is a delving, it's almost like the fervor of people on the stock exchange floor where people are holding shit up and screaming like buy, sell, whatever, soy all day, fucking soy. And people really, they clamor around that. Like gossip is very much a human transaction, and you are transacting with somebody else's personage, identity, whatever. And that it's always about somebody that isn't around. And in that regard, within the transaction, you begin to create that false sense of security of thinking that you understand a situation, whereas really at best you're playing the telephone game, and at worst you are like committing perjury, libel on a personal level, whatever. Whereas an interaction would be just having a simple discussion as to like this was what it did. Like you and I could have
Well, that's
conversations.
one of the commandments.
What's that?
It's one of the commandments. It's a bearing false witness.
Bearing false witness.
You know, thou shalt not bear false witness. And
once again, the
you know,
Bible.
you and I were talking about this the other day. Remember, it was the day after we recorded the last episode that I was telling you this guy was talking about that I was listening to in a video. I'm trying to remember which one it was. I think it was Jordan Peterson, but he was talking about that in the Christian faith, it has the best basis for psychology, right? It's
Yeah.
not that it's by far the best, it's just the perfect counteraction to the Eastern beliefs. And it encompasses all parts and aspects of the human psyche and consciousness, you
Okay.
know,
Yeah.
as a guide. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and like that's exactly what really struck me of parsing these words in a way to understand it, is that looking up the definition, as you had asked earlier about transaction versus interaction, is that the definitions that I'm seeing have been kind of like washed, like kind of grayed out or whatever. And they make it as though they are synonymous. But I think that basically anybody listening can understand that when you hold the two together, you can intuit the differences between them, right? And the idea is that certainly Jordan Peterson and the Bible, like bearing false witness and everything, is that there has always been discussions that chart around this subject, that I would like to think that I have two of them sort of quarantined into where you could actually take them and compare them and understand the difference. And there, like, not only are there a lot of discussions that happen throughout all of like written and recorded history regarding this, but you also see a lot of results that this creates. Like a transaction is always going to be like long division. There's always going to be a carry. And that happens with gossip as well, is that when two people are talking about a third person, then it is going to create something that is misinterpreted or something that is misrepresented or something that is like nobody's business. And so that is going to create cultural echoes and ripples regarding that. Whereas interactions is confrontation. And when it comes to transactions being dating, where you are qualifying a person and you were saying like, hey, I have this to offer in terms of my character, and I have this to offer in terms of my income or my stability or my emotional prowess or my body count or what the fuck ever it is that people do on dates. I don't even really know anything about that much anymore. But then interacting is confronting somebody, or interacting is confronting somebody, and not the date, but actually approaching somebody and just saying, hey, like, there's something about you. You have this je ne sais quoi. You have this aura. I think you're beautiful. I think the way that you move is fetching. That is an interaction. And to continue that even in what you would call a date, it's not really a date at that point. It is, I mean, I guess that you would say that it is even an early relationship. Even in the first moments, it is kind of, if you get a response back, then that is like the founding of a relationship, but is at the same time a relationship just with somebody brand new.
So the way I'm taking it is that it's in the way that you view a person as an acquaintance or a companion. Because if I were to view a person as an acquaintance, I'm going to have more of a transaction with them as opposed to interaction. If I consider that person a companion, whether that's in a monogamous relationship or it's a hetero relationship with your friend, I'm going to be more open. I'm going to divulge deeper into my feelings, and I'm going to want to understand that person deeper than, say, like an acquaintance.
Right. And so you made an interesting point talking about the cashier at a store where it's a transactional system that's happening there. You know me, like the area that I live in is that I have like pretty profound personal relationships with all of the store and shop owners in my neighborhood. I go, yeah, like liquor stores primarily, which obviously like I have a problem, but also on account of the fact that here in Denver, Colorado, is we don't suffer Walmarts. There is not a Walmart within Denver city limits. Like if you think that it is, look very closely at the line demarking Denver. Like there are no Walmarts, there are no Targets, there are no Chick-fil-A's. We don't suffer that shit because there is still this reminder of us having been like a mining colony. And we remember Ludlow. The Ludlow massacre happened turn of the century, late 1800s, early 1900s. I probably should look it up, but I'm just gonna fucking go with it. And it was a mining town where the town, they owned everything. They owned the shops, and they printed company script for the people to spend the company script at the company shops. And it was all just one big circle, and it was absolutely insufferable. Thousands of people living in this town eventually rose up and decided to take it back away from them and begin building their own economy, their own culture, and otherwise. And so the mining company itself sent in aspects of the U.S. military, the Pinkertons, and they committed the Ludlow massacre. Now I am going to have to look it up because I'm always touchy about numbers in terms of people that died. Let's see here.
So was this around the time where there was that vote that, Denver only won by 3 votes as becoming the capital of Colorado? It was between us and Cripple Creek.
Yeah. This is around that time, actually. Yeah, I remember the last time deep diving on this. Yeah, it's interesting that you said so. Yeah, 1914. I mean, I'm just going to read Wikipedia. Like, Wikipedia is so compromised, it's ridiculous, but I think that they'll probably give us a fair shake on this subject. The Ludlow Massacre was a mass killing perpetrated by anti-striker militia during the Colorado Coalfield War. Soldiers from the Colorado National Guard and private guards employed by Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, CF&I, attacked a tent colony of roughly 1,200 striking coal miners and their families in Ludlow, Colorado on April 20th, 1914. Approximately 21 people, including miners, wives, and children, were killed. John D. Rockefeller Jr., a part owner of CF&I, who had recently appeared before a United States congressional hearing on the strikes, was widely blamed for having orchestrated the massacre. And so that's just the background in terms of like, this is something that even people that are unaware of it, like the culture of Denver remembers it. And you see it in the culture in terms of like back to liquor stores specifically, is that we don't have an economy of people being able to start small businesses of selling just any commodity. We don't have corner stores that are selling t-shirts. We don't have corner stores of small business owners that are selling sneakers. They would have to buy into Nike or Adidas or otherwise, and they're simply not having that. They wind up in big box corporate chains. But with liquor stores in Denver, one thing that we have always done so beautifully competent and right, and one of the things that a lot of people complain about that drives me up the wall is that, well, I don't want to go to the liquor store because, you know, that Korean family, like it always smells funny in there. And that's like what gets to smell funny. They have the pride of ownership. And the idea is that the reason that you see such diversity of ownership within liquor stores in Colorado is that it is the one commodity that people can emigrate here and truly live the American dream, the pride of ownership and the awesome fucking service. Like, this is why I have that interaction with people that I transact with. The transaction is me buying the booze with my kind of hard-earned money. But beyond that, I have this wholesome interaction with the people to where we know each other. We trust each other. Like, all of my money goes to them. And then because they are entrepreneurs on a city and state level, that means that that money doesn't go to some faceless corporation like a big box store, like a grocery store chain or a Target or otherwise. You know, you're not having it delivered via Amazon. This is a controlled substance, and it is in the hands of small business owners that are as much a part of the community as they contribute to the community. Yeah.
Yeah, but unfortunately, no, people not wanting to go down there, them not bathrooms exist, if you remember that, Adam. So for the view of this, Adam actually showed this to me when we were in college, and it was this. I've seen another one somewhere when we lived off the second Logan. There's another one, but
You're cutting out real bad, my dude.
maybe. Oh, can you hear me? Any better?
You're that was all choppy. You were talking about seeing things when we were at Second and Logan, but I didn't hear what it was that you were talking about. Your image is frozen and your audio is coming in real choppy.
Yeah. Is it any better now?
Still not getting video, but the audio is better. What were you saying?
Oh, well, my video is showing up here. Is that on now?
Yeah, it's better now. There you go.
Okay. I was saying the Nexus. So there was one off of Second and Logan somewhere around where we used to live that I found at one point. But for the viewer, what the Nexus was a concrete like picture space, and around it was surrounded by a circular retaining wall that was maybe about 2 feet tall. And when you stood in the middle of the center pitcher's mound and you spoke, it echoed back to you.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that, Adam, when we walked
Yeah.
and there's that guy in the water, the
Yep.
statue of the guy who jumped out of the building that they covered up.
Yep. Yeah, during COVID, they actually filled all of those mounds and they blamed it on the fact that it was like where a lot of homeless people got together. But I don't think so, because that particular site, that particular installation, that art, that sculpture, and again, it's like obsidian blocks in a ring that are just this diameter, that when you stand in the epicenter of it, the blocks are no taller than a shoebox. But because of the radius, the distance of it, is that when you stand in the center, if you focus, you can hear your own breathing echo back to you. And then you speak and you hear that echo back to you. It's like a very wholesome, validating kind of an experience. Like those sites were just so beautiful. Public art is another, that is the interaction. Art is interaction, interacting with the audience. Purchasing art is the transaction. So when it comes to installations of sculpture and whatnot, then that to me is kind of one of the most wholesome and purest arts. All of architecture should be art. All of city design should be art. It should propagate people interacting. And so back to liquor stores, is that is the only commodity resource that we have, and it is a controlled substance and a toxin. Like, you will die if you don't get it, and it's one of the very, very few substances, if not one of two, that will do that to you. But it is also the only commodity that brings some of the most hope of being able to install and embed a true marketplace of interacting via transaction. Whereas the only place that you could go and not have any money is a library, a public library, like a public institution of knowledge. It's supposed to be a place where ideally people would get together to play chess or talk philosophy or shoot the shit or go on a date or whatever, but it just so happens that you got a bunch of bums looking at porn because it's the only place that they could go that it doesn't demand a transaction. It is there for interacting with, it is there to interact with knowledge, but because it is the only institution that it doesn't require any transaction whatsoever, then it gets flooded with the disenfranchised and the downtrodden, because that's literally the only place that they could go. If they want to camp out at even a bus stop, that the bus stop itself is private property via whatever public transport entity. Libraries are it. If we had a true installation of human interaction, then public parks, state parks for sure, but a lot of those also become inaccessible. And certainly when it comes to state parks or whatever, if you want to go up into the mountains, then you're not getting there if you don't have a car, if you don't have the money to take a train or whatever.
So you were mentioning how architecture should be considered artwork, which I understand. I mean, aspects of it should be, but I just want to bring up something that I was watching the other day, and I was actually watching something about Gilgamesh, okay? And he was the first Freemason, and he's also Nimrod in mythology. And they call him the first Freemason because he's the one who's credited with building the Tower of Babel. And that in the Freemason symbol of the compass and the square, there's the G, and they said it was for geometry, right? That's for the uninitiated. But the true meaning behind the G is Gilgamesh, the first architect of the
Interesting.
Freemasons.
I never do that.
So I just wanted to bring that in. I mean, I guess since it is esoteric, and it's funny because it does synchronize with what you're saying, and it was resonating with me because we talked about, I think it was episode 3 maybe, where we were talking about the cathedrals, right? How they had made them with sacred geometry to resonate, and they retain the vibrations within the building.
Yeah.
I mean, so in a way, that is a form of art. And then, Tartaria, everything in Tartaria or ancient megalithic structures, they were designed to hone a resonance.
To be a part of nature. This is one of the beautiful aspects of Tennessee that I saw, is that when you understand the Cumberland Gap, is that during colonialism, there was this ridge, this rift, this impassable terrain that people just could not get beyond, and it was the Cumberland Gap. And I never understood it. You come to Colorado and we have some pretty foreboding and challenging mountains. We have the highest number of 14ers, say, but the 14er has a clear path that you could walk. Like, you maybe want like a cane or something, but it's absolutely doable. So I never really understood the Cumberland Gap. I was like, why wouldn't they just, like, they could have dynamited, they could have whatever. No. Being in Tennessee, you realize how embedded in nature all of civilization has to be. And not only are you having to build it around the rivers and the hills, like these hills just shoot up out of nowhere. There's no scaling that. Like, you will die if you try. And if you have thousands of people that you're trying to get beyond it, you're losing a percentage of them because it is so arduous. You just can't get past it. Mother Nature ain't having it. Whatever's on the other side, it's like that piece that Land Before Time is trying to get to. What is it that I'm always saying? You say sounds like Petrie. Yep. There we go.
Yeah.
And seeing that sort of landscape and everything, and then seeing the way that the entire, say, the city of Gatlinburg and Knoxville, like certainly East Tennessee, I saw it more prominently, whereas I believe that West Tennessee is a little more flatland. Never really had the time to get to Nashville or Memphis, but it's so clear that these are simply outlying colonies that are doing their best to survive within nature. And so when you're talking about with ancient sites and Gilgamesh and civilization, megacities, whatever, is that what they were doing is that they were building it inside of nature, acknowledging nature. And so what I meant is that all of architecture and city planning should be art, is that art is an interaction until you purchase it, and then it's a transaction. But art is the presentation of an interaction. Cities should be built to be walkable. Cities should be built to be bikeable. Cities should be built to be drivable. Knoxville was hardly any of those things. Like if you ever are like stuck on I-40 between Knoxville and Gatlinburg, good fucking luck. Those people drive like fucking maniacs. You're driving through Gatlinburg at night, it's just dark as piss, bro. Like you have no hope in hell of driving anywhere above 40 miles an hour. And yet everybody is driving at 80 miles an hour. Even driving, and the whole culture is built around driving, doesn't work because it doesn't embed itself within the like it's something to be interacted with. It is simply transacting from point A to point B.
So, I mean, with what you're saying right there is that staying on the subject of the buildings and them being an interaction, I do feel that that's what was lost with the Great Reset, the last Great Reset. So when Tartaria fell and they wiped that out of our history books, okay, I believe that's when architecture no longer had an artistic form to it, and they made it the square cubes that they did on purpose.
Feudalism, yeah.
Yeah, to keep us locked in our cages, to keep us mentally stuck in our conscious mind, right? So I feel like all of that was intentional.
Yeah. Yeah, removing that is one of the foremost things that you could do, is that you remove a landscape of interaction and you produce a landscape of transaction. And this is as obvious as it is that we hairless beach monkeys convinced ourselves that you have to earn and spend money just to exist. Like no other animal has a concept like that. I mean, maybe octopi are so beautiful and clever that they'll offer another one a seashell if they like them, and that's sort of like a transaction kind of a system. But no other animal, no other species has this need of having to transact just to exist. And that is the matrix that has been built around us that we have so taken for granted, is that everything is preventing people from the interaction. We wear shoes. We don't ground out with nature as often as we should. We don't hug trees. We don't, like the whole family structure is interrupted on the day-to-day 9 to 5, where people think it's perfectly natural that a bell rings and then everybody wakes up and just scatters and goes in different directions and lives different lives, like away from the family structure. Like there's something to be said about contributing yourself to duty, but the idea of the level of sacrifice to where you have to go out and transact just to be able to hold the family structure and the roof over your heads together. That is the rule of transaction. And it gets a little bit deeper as to where I was talking about how a lot of these elements have always been alluded to throughout history. I just feel as though, and I maybe even heard this somewhere, I was trying to think, did somebody else explain this better than me? And I'm adopting it, but I'm just going to run with it, is to, throughout history, you see people kind of like dancing around the edges, flirting with this idea, but never really getting it, like getting a pin in it. But you also see the effects throughout culture, and you can begin to predict what direction culture is going into. As I was saying, the transactions always beget long division, say gossip. When two people are gossiping about one person, there is an error that occurs. There is an error of interpretation, there is an error of intent, and there is an error of responsibility. Of what was it again from the Bible? Do not bear false witness. Yep. Kind of those points. What occurs with that is that those ripples begin to generate, is that everybody joins in this marketplace of transacting, say, in gossip. And then you have the game of telephone of gossip from the two people to the one. And then you have people gossiping about the gossipers. And then you have people gossiping about the gossipers and what they gossiped. And then the whole thing is just so fucking twisted up that is what begets culture. And then the culture begins to breed things like people always having to constantly self-victimize or self-emulate themselves. This is the occurrence because it becomes so untenable that if you were in a workplace and say, oh, you know, like Sally in accounting is a real slut, and it's like, well, no, Sally just had like her blouse blew in the wind or something and it showed a lot of leg and she smiled about it, and then somehow it gets out of control as it, you know, she's blowing 13 dudes on a Saturday night kind of a thing. Like for Sally, that means that the very culture around her has become so untenable and so caustic that it's going to start begetting transactions and very real, like fungible transactions. Is that she's the one that works in accounting, she just has to leave her job because she hasn't had a mental breakdown. Suddenly the entire company's accounting has gone to shit. Um, you also can see it as another conversation that you and I were having recently that I am stupid passionate about. And it's probably me projecting because if anybody is on the spectrum of autism, it's this Chango. However, my belief is, and you'll pardon me for speaking of the differently abled, is that autism is somebody that is like just crippled in a chair that cannot speak or function regularly, but has like a rapport with dolphins, with cetaceans, right? This new fad that's coming out is that they've been talking to us about ADD, ADHD, which again, like if I have anything, I have everything. ADD, ADHD, chemical imbalances. And I'm going to start with this here. One thing that I really wanted to look up as a point that I've been trying to bring up frequently is that just very recently, say this is from May 20, 2021. I'm sure that a lot of people have heard about it. I'm not screen sharing. I don't need to screen share. I'll just read it. And so the very first result on Google, when you search chemical imbalance disproven, you remember, dude, like when we were growing up, that's all that anybody talked about. You have a problem, kid? Otherwise, whatever. They would say, oh, well, they just have a chemical imbalance. It's not their fault. It's just nature and they got a bad deal, right? It's a chemical imbalance that, well, we just need to adjust it with all of these pharmaceutical chemicals that could literally like change somebody's developmental era of their physiology and create like physical deformations, skeletal deformation. Some of these chemicals were so fucking potent, but it was all to say that, oh, you know, like you just have like a lack of this chemical and that lack of chemical is out of balance with other chemicals. So we're just going to introduce other chemicals that'll get things kind of back on whack. In fact, no experiment has ever shown that anyone has an imbalance of any neurotransmitters or any other brain chemicals. The entire theory was hypothetical. Over the last 10 years, independent research has continually shown the chemical imbalance theory to be false. Now, how many trillions of dollars were sold on the backs of doping up little kids that just were behaving badly or maybe came from a bad home life or what have you? But the real damage that came with it was also the narrative of transaction. People are tired of the transaction. That's why homelessness is such a problem as it is. I truly think is that when you see homeless people, the majority of them are either there on purpose or they are so checked out with the economy of transactions that they just don't deal with it. They can't deal with it anymore. And so the people that are still in this soup, this stew, this bullshit of transacting, well, then they need a new currency. And that new currency is victimization. Self-victimization is a currency that anybody could use in any market. And it means that people get to say that I identify as a 3,000-year-old foxkin who was paralyzed, and I need everybody to announce my pronouns as like frog and frogger. And anybody who doesn't do that is literally committing a hate crime because who I am is de facto the currency of victimization. This is what you see with the chemical imbalance discussions that they were having back in the day, that they built up this $1 trillion industry of doping up kids and grandmas and fucking everybody in between. Now they're talking about shades of autism. And what is autism to anybody's definition? If you say that, well, you know, I think that I'm like on the spectrum of autism because I don't really register a lot of social cues. And it's like, well, maybe you don't register these social cues because throughout your experience, you just found that those social cues don't resonate with you. Or you found that whenever you did interact with these social cues, that you wouldn't get what you thought you would back. If you were given a social cue that seems to be attraction, but turns out to be a falsehood, then, you know, suddenly when somebody comes on to you, they're going to be like, oh, he didn't seem to register at all. He must be on the spectrum. That's not the case at all. It's the fact that you are instinctively reacting and responding to certain situations, which brings us back to a larger ideal, is that with any given sickness, we have a word for depression, and that is literally like, depression is here. And it's like, depression is the whole fucking body. Depression is the past, present, and future. Depression is your soul, it's your toes, it's your fucking hair follicles. Like, it ain't just here where you like put that in there and then suddenly, oh, I could ride a bike again, like the fucking commercials that they sell us. We have a word for depression, and it's so devoid and divested from the concept of like, you want to say that somebody's on the spectrum because they didn't react to you right in any given kind of social cue situation. What you really need to address is not a question of like something that is certifiable. You really look at that person and realize, like, are they on the spectrum, or is this a person that suffered a moral injury or is currently experiencing heartbreak? And we have no discussions as to that. Like, we know that those are very real afflictions that very actually afflict people all the fucking time, like dying of a broken heart. Miura, Kentaro Miura, I think I have that right, the artist and creator of the manga Berserk. Anybody who hasn't read it yet, pirate it, read it. It's amazing, but it's damaging. Take it in small doses because it's very, very real. But Kentaro Miura is probably one of the most prolific artists in our time. At least he was. We've been reading Berserk. He's been working on Berserk for 30 years. And then just as he finally starts wrapping things up, it seems like he still had 8 years before it would have come to its finality. The guy died of a cardial bifurcation. A cardio bifurcation is literally describing a broken heart. His heart split in two not long after the death of one of his peers and friends. The guy died of what we call cardio bifurcation.
So, I mean, and a lot of things that you covered right now, Adam, and this is going for any of the people that want to hate the cancel culture, anything, you know. What Adam's discussing are the principles of cause and effect, the principle of rhythm, the principle of polarity, and the principle of correspondence. And we went over these in the last episode. So, mainly cause and effect. So, what you're saying, Adam, is because we want to go as a society to transaction as opposed to interaction, then it has evolved our society into a society of transaction, which is on the opposite end of the polarity from the interaction that we're discussing, the difference between the two. And the reason why I did want you to look up the definitions is I had suspected that it was going to be similar. And that way we would break it down in the way that we were going to for our polarity of interaction versus transaction. But so I mean, touching on what you're talking about is that fuck, I lost my train of thought.
It's one of those subjects that it's hard to pin down, and it's very, you know, like once I got the interaction versus transaction, it really drew down like some very far-reaching and broad concepts, but it always gets like squishy and kind of like an ether that you're just trying to reach out to. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, damn, I wish I would remember what the hell I was trying to say. I freaking had something I was going with it. But
Yeah, I you know, this idea of autism and spectrums of autism, it's the definition of insanity to me, which is funny because the subject is literally insanity. And everybody is like, "Oh yeah, like I'm a spectrum of autism on this side." Like, people are literally just choosing commodities, like commodified personages that they can adopt because again, that is their currency that they can use in any social market that promotes transaction versus interaction. The interaction falls to the wayside is that for those of us that don't engage in the transaction, say the homeless or the people that get written off as being on the spectrum autistic or wholesale retarded, whatever it is that these people don't have it isn't a question of them not having the energy to interact in this market. It is a question of them needing an interaction versus a transaction. They don't have the time. Like, say somebody who's like dying or whatever, they don't want to gossip. They don't buy into the tit for tat, this about my ego. You respond to my ego, you recognize my ego, and now you can present your ego, this back and forth. Like, there is truly just the interaction. Like, what do you like? What do you want to talk about what you like where do we begin to start that momentum of being able to discuss ideas? And this is something that certainly is fitting for you and I to have on this podcast, is because that's exactly who you and I always were. We just almost immediately became fucking fast friends. It was like, yo, hey, you motherfucker, yeah, we're fucking friends now, what do you think about that? And it's like, you want to take the top bunk? Like, hey, it's all yours. But we were always at a loss in many, many situations. You were better at traversing it than me. And I always struggled. I couldn't put my fucking finger on what it was that was going on, that I just couldn't seem to get my head around. And I couldn't ever find any. And this is an interesting similarity in language, the etymology of when you are trying to climb a wall, say, your hand is seeking purchase. I was always seeking purchase in marketplaces of ideas and relationships, but I could never find any purchase. And I didn't realize that that's literally what it is. The purchase is the transaction, is that it is saying that there is something fungible but not tangible, that we will interact between each other as a transaction.
So
I just
touching on
go ahead. Sorry.
That's a side effect, that they say of when people start to have a higher vibration, higher state of consciousness, you start to let go of the things of this physical realm, and you begin to not care so much about the physical body. Even you start to let things go. And I mean, again, that's why we talked about it in the episode we were talking about hallucinogens in, is that in this reality, we're here to find that balance between our physical and our spiritual, right?
Yeah.
This is the realm of duality. So we're trying to walk the middle path. And there are the people, though, that are doing it in a better way, where they're selling all their stuff, they're getting in a van and they're living in a van, traveling cross country, right? And not paying for rent in a house or anything like that. You also have the free man movement, where people are putting they're not driving, they're traveling on their license plate, because this is an institution and a corporation. Your DMV hides behind a state seal. They are a corporation like any other corporation. They're not a state entity. So all of these things are where I feel like people are starting to fall out of the system. That, like what you're saying, is people who don't mix with the system, you're told that you're this, you're that, you might resonate in this end of the spectrum or whatever. And people are realizing that no, this isn't the way people are supposed to be living. We're not supposed to live our lives like this. We're not supposed to wake up day in and day out and go to work and not have time, free will to do the things that we want to create. And I do feel like, again, and I want to tie this back to Tartaria, and I kind of want to tie it into what we were going to originally in the last discussion, is North Korea and Russia. Because with the fall of Tartaria, I feel like they were trying to erase a way of civilization at this time, where I was telling Adam that they created in the Industrial Revolution the school system being 8 to 3. And they didn't realize at the time of creating that they were trying to put people in a rhythm of a workforce, put us in a type of set mentality, but they didn't realize they were just creating greater cogs for the machine. And it really took away our freedom, our individuality. And so, with us going to war right now and all of this talk about belittling Russia or what North Korea is doing, and mind you, I'm just another individual. I am just saying my piece. This is my opinion. If you look at how much a rocket costs, it costs a lot of fuel. So for North Korea to shoot 23 missiles in between Japan and South Korea, that costs a lot of money. And for a country that's supposed to be broke, I feel like a lot of the hate speech going on between those two countries, and Adam and I have discussed this before. What do them two countries have in common? The main thing is that Tartaria was a big part of those two countries. And I feel like they're the last remnants of the old civilization of the last Great Reset.
Yeah. You make the point perfectly, and this is why I love the idea of Tartaria, is that when you look up images of Tartaria, all of them are heavily photoshopped, but beautifully photoshopped. I love a good hoax. I love the creativity and the blending of reality versus fiction. But the point of Tartaria is so fucking important because it drives exactly what you're saying home, is the previous civilization. And this, if anybody hasn't seen Ancient Apocalypse, Graham Hancock's show on Netflix, it's one of the most powerful things ever. When you talk about Tartaria, it's exactly the conversation that we need to be discussing, whether or not you go down some rabbit holes and you just find like a whole lot of woo-woo, made-up, hoaxy stuff. Where the hell is my... Oh, there we go. But Cholula, Mexico, and anytime you say Cholula, instantly hot sauce, right?
Yeah.
Like you think about the fucking hot sauce. It's tasty hot sauce. I don't think it's terribly Mexican. I think it's like Texican at best, if not outright white people fucking food, but it's tasty.
This is why I was saying that I believe the Mayans are actually the key to the world as opposed to the Egyptians.
This is what Andrew Schultz says in one of his specials. He's like, I don't know about these pyramids in Egypt. Nobody knows who built those things. He's like, they have pyramids in Mexico. Nobody questions who built those, and it's like so on point. It's like, yeah, bro, like, who do you think builds all of American infrastructure? Who do you think does your shingles on your roof? Who do you think pours the asphalt or the concrete or lays the electrical line? Like, those are Mexican people. And so the largest pyramid in the world, hidden beneath a hill in Cholula, Mexico, lies the largest pyramid ever built. It's the biggest of all of them that we have thus far discovered. And what do they have on top of it? A Catholic church. So that's exactly it, is that they do undo the previous modalities of existence, like Tartaria. The old, when you say Tartaria, it has like a very beautiful, flowing, organic, effeminate, sort of Victorian era kind of an architectural style. It's very welcoming, it's very warming, it's very vibrant, it brings a lot of resonance. And then what we put on top of that are cookie cutter boxes of machinism and brutalism, like the architectural styles of fascism and such. It's perfectly clear. And this is again a system of transaction, because with transaction and not interaction, transaction will always have a hierarchy and it will always have an oligarchy. This is what gives rise to the Cardassians. Is that, and I say Cardassians like the Star Trek people with the fucked up necks and everything, because I don't see any difference between the two. Fuck it. Like, fuck you, General Dukat, or whatever your name is, fucking Kim Kardashian. Is that they will always, within the transaction of gossip and within the transaction of people needing things to offer, then they are able to discuss what these people are doing with their lives. Like, the attraction to reality TV is that it gives everybody almost like a free bank account of which they could transact with people. Is that, did you see what the Kardashians did? It becomes this tertiary kind of a gossip, and it puts them at the top to the tune of billions of fucking dollars. But you also see that within that transactionary lifestyle, that they destroy any masculine energy or being within their realm, because the masculine energy is bound for interaction and asserting interaction. War, on its face in ancient times, is interaction. If it's people with rocks or spears or people duking it out or whatever, that is interaction. The problem is that war has been abducted by the transaction of making it such a cash cow, as that you're saying, is that not only are they destroying, the ancient evidence of Tartaria between North Korea and Russia, which I haven't seen any convincing evidence, like photos and such of it, but something about it resonates with me that, fuck it, I believe it wholesale. I believe that there are ruins out there that have these old Victorian era, predating the Victoria era, of another kind of architecture and another way of being, of energy and whatnot.
What any world map before 1943 has Tartaria as a country, right? And there's been articles, and I've seen them, and they talk about the people of Tartary, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and tartar sauce
Right.
supposedly came from Tartaria.
Well, and also, what was it? The India, their word Tartar is of barbarian, I think. Like that's something that I picked up from the 13th Warrior. Remember at the very beginning where he has to become emissary to the north, and they hear somebody of another caravan like riding over the hill, and he's like, the Tartars are coming. That is synonymous with maybe Vikings specifically, maybe Northmen, maybe barbarian, but it's
Well, if you
interesting because
remember, according to the myth, the Great Wall of China wasn't built because of Genghis Khan. It was built because of Tartarians in the land of giants.
right. And that what is it that the turrets face inward and not outwards.
Yeah.
And I didn't really look into that, but that's an interesting concept right there. Is that if you look at the scale of this thing, no empire could really expend its energy to protect its civilian population from outwardly forces. But all empire does throughout history is that we've seen is that they will spend every energy to contain the empire. They will always do so in the name of saying that because of the outwardly forces, we need to build this wall to protect you, but it's always a cage. It's not a barrier, it's always a cage. They always gin up these concepts about North Korea and Russia, and they say, look, like they're meddling with our elections, they're building nuclear bombs, they're launching destructive materials. And it's like, well, we wrote the fucking book on that. What the hell are you concerned about? Our tax dollars go to fucking Jerusalem for their Iron Dome. Where was our Iron Dome during 9/11? We haven't got an Iron Dome, and we're shitting our britches like, oh, North Korea could launch a fucking nuke into anywhere in America at any given time. And it's like, well, they can't do it with Israel, so what the fuck are we doing spending tax dollars that we don't spend here to make sure we have an Iron Dome as well? Because in Israel, it isn't an Iron Dome, it's an iron cage.
Yeah. And again, what I believe the Middle East is I believe that they're false replicas built after the last Great Reset, after they destroyed the actual religious temples, and they built these false replicas in the Middle East because 80% of scripture took place in Africa. So, to be honest, the reason why you can't find a lot of these things is because you're looking in the wrong place. And people are warring over land that has no significant meaning to it, other than it's just an idle image put there for people to war over, to create distrust between two people, to
Yep.
just continue war, to cause us to continue to fight each other and divide us.
This is probably what the cabal is that, again, in transactions of basic relationships and, back and forth with people as opposed to interactions, is that in transactions, there will always be a hierarchy. There will always be the propaganda. They know how to twist those transactions, whereas people transact in the marketplace, the state, the cabal, the Illuminati, or whatever, are the marketplace. And they will always know how to influence those things to turn family members against each other, to turn neighbors against each other, to turn countries against each other. And all that they have is the true currency of fungible fiat, of which they are able to benefit from as they spend our energy to spend our energy. It's just such an encyclical, psycho, fucked up kind of a system. Is that like when you pay attention to the Cardassians, and the Cardassians are billionaires, when you pay your taxes and the taxes go to the Iron Dome in Israel and Jerusalem, or they go to Tomahawk missiles over in fucking Ukraine with people that barely even know how to use the fucking things. That is the transaction. There is always a hierarchy, and the hierarchy knows very well how to influence these things. This is what happened in the Civil War. This is what happened in World War One. World War One was just a bunch of family members that got pissed off at each other and then threw hundreds of millions of people into the goddamn wood chipper to sort out their family spat. They were able to do that, and they called it patriotism. They
Yeah.
said, "Oh yeah, it was what's his face? The man, tip of my tongue, Franz Ferdinand. Oh yeah, it was all that. Like that's what brought 100 people out to just go buck like the Serbians versus the what have you. I'm definitely drawing a blank. I need to bone up on my fucking
But
roll.
that's why Albert Einstein said he loathed patriotism, right? It's senseless violence and something on command. I can't
Yeah,
remember the way he exactly worded it, but he was saying how he loathed patriotism. And if you remember, Albert Einstein had to flee Germany because his number was called for the concentration camps.
yeah, yeah. That's where it all starts. That tit for tat, back and forth, kind of like I have this, and when I get it back, then I am invested. People are invested in transacting, and this is what happens when people are caught up in propaganda is that they are so invested in the back and forth transaction that they actually their lizard, animal, mammal, whatever brain, or maybe their higher functioning brain begins to realize that this is something that you were invested in and it must be maintained. You need to maintain the momentum and you cannot have it taken away from you. That is why that the people who gossip are always the foremost people that have things to be gossiped about. Why they are the ones that project the most to gossip about others is because they are the most afraid. They are the most that are at risk of losing their storehouse of this lifetime of transactional shit talk. They are the foremost to screech about anybody and everybody else.
So, with that, Adam, you definitely covered the principle of vibration, the principle of rhythm. We've covered the principle of mentalism. So, I'd say in just this conversation alone, and this is what I was saying about the seven hermetic principles, is they're in everything. And it's funny because as we're going over all these things, I'm like relating them to each to the
We got to
principles.
get you a bell to ring every time I get one like ding.
No, but serious because all of them are in within this discussion, and that's what I was telling you about the hermetically sealed. I can't remember. That was like in the third episode or something. We were talking about it,
Yeah,
right? Where I was saying it's hard to argue the seven hermetic principles because they're in everything,
yeah,
and they really are. Because everything that moves, it vibrates. Okay, so everything's in a motion, so they have to continue the motion. There's nothing they can do to stop it because everything, the principle of rhythm. So everything flows out and in, and it has its tides, and all things rise and fall, and the pendulum swings, right?
yeah,
And I mean, just like the cause and effect, every cause has its effect, every effect has its cause, and everything happens according to law,
yeah,
you know. And it is that rather than having interaction, we chose to have transactions. Those transactions were the cause that had the effect that our society now built up on a society based off of transactions, where we no longer have deep emotional connections with people anymore. Like, I feel like the world has now become a cold shadow of what it used to be. And again,
yeah,
here's the polarity and duality principles, okay? Is that everything has two sides and everything is dual. So I know we're supposed to be in the age of Aquarius and people are supposed to be waking up. But again, like I said before in another podcast, is that I feel the only thing they can do to stop the all God is that he is the vibration of everything. It exists in every living thing, everything that is not living, everything that's matter has vibration. And because of that, they all exist in it. So the only way they can stop it or try to orchestrate their plans is try to disrupt this vibration.
yeah,
And the only way they can do those things is by breaking us down the way they are, like what I was saying with the architecture, making it less vibrate with resonance and vibrate with energies or vibrate with us. Now they're cold squares that just lock us in like a cage, like you were describing with the walls and stuff.
yeah.
And all of that stuff breaks us down and it makes us more of a slave. And something I wanted to talk about because you were talking about the knowledge thing, and I didn't get to touch on it in the last episode. But when I said that I took a trip, I had a vision. In this vision, I was being shackled, and it was in ancient times, like around Egypt. And I was telling Adam about this, and I remember I had this strong feeling of distraught, and I was wondering, why are they chaining me? I'm just trying to help. And I was told that the reason why I was is because I shared too much knowledge. And I bring this up because it was a discussion Adam and I had talked about. It's when he said that I was going through things where I definitely didn't know if I wanted to continue on with the podcast. It was just that I wanted to change the direction because there's some secrets that were kept secret for a reason. This is why secret societies existed. Not everyone can take that information. But then I started to realize, like Adam and I had discussed, that by not talking about conspiracy theories, by not talking about these things, we're creating a world of ignorance or ignorance because we're teaching people how to ignore things by not discussing them, by not acknowledging them. And I feel that these are the two sides of the war that they fought us on. They fought us with fear. They used fear to get us into the mindsets that we are and to distrust each other. And that's why Adam and I wanted to do this podcast, is to break down that fear by explaining esoteric symbolism so people could use discernment. Now, the other way that they attack us is to breaking down our psyches by making us live in these cold worlds, living 9 to 5, working a daily job, forcing us to have transactions versus interactions, and they break our spirits.
Yeah. And they describe that broken spirit as it's autism. Like, you fucking chongos. Like, you know exactly what you're doing. And people just buy into it wholesale. It's like, no, these are people that haven't had the ability to, what I was saying about being able to visit state parks is that even if you have the ability, you have to have the car, you have to have the gas, you have to be able to afford that, you have to afford the snacks. And most importantly, you have to be able to afford that time off of work. And so we don't have a connection with nature where we only see it on Saturday and Sunday, which is, largely most everybody's free time to do so. Nature is going to be doing things throughout the fucking week. It don't know Monday versus Wednesday, like it doesn't matter. And you would be absolutely enthralled and so grounded and connected to understand that. Like just to be able to exist with it, to interact.
It's a weekend when you're weekend after your weekdays where it's constantly weakening you throughout. And then you get to the weekend. By that time, you're so weakened, you don't have the energy to do those things. And then, see, they just break you down systematically. And there's nothing we could do other than to ignore what they're putting in front of us and go within. Because, see, we're ignoring the wrong things. We're choosing to ignore what they're doing to us instead of acknowledging what they do to us and ignoring to pay attention to it and instead pay attention within.
Yeah,
You know, all
absolutely.
of us know these things. I've discussed before. Our spirit knows these things. It's just living in this world, we became shielded and now we're like drones and you have to wake up from it, which is why a lot of people in the conspiracy theory realm always use that term, wake up. You
Yeah.
know, like you're in a sleep, you have this veil over your face and you are asleep because what you're seeing in front of you are blinders and you're not actually seeing what the world is until you, I guess, begin to not pay attention to the things they're trying to make you pay attention to. Like Adam was saying, that's the transaction, is you're choosing to purchase what they offer you. And by giving the attention to the things that they're trying to distract you with, you are making that purchase.
It's interesting. I never really applied the concept to inward versus outward, but this is something that turns me off about like a lot of exercise culture is that exercise culture is it's inward transacting. You get your supplements, you get your spin class, you get the big butt. Like it is a tit for tat back and forth kind of a thing, whereas spirituality or religion is an interaction. It's an inward interaction. Like a lot of exercise culture and whatnot is really just like in it for the results or to maintain a standard. And people should have standards. And exercise is not ever going to be like an unwholesome thing. However, there is a difference between, just doing the repetitive nature so that you can become healthier and maintain your position and your body. It is a healthy thing to do, but it is more of an interaction to develop that body by barn raising, by building megalithic structures, by being an engineer, by having to, brave like a frozen river or something. Like, it should be the interaction that develops our bodies into a healthy state, and not a transaction just so that we could maintain that equity.
So in that case, like, and I want to talk about the duality of this. We touched on it in the last episode, but the Eastern versus Western um, belief in creativity. So in creationism, I guess, is that we believe that there has to be somebody physically creating something, which I guess in a sense it is by you working out to get the desired physique that you want. But I look at it more in the Eastern way of creationism, is that everything that exists grows without itself, right? Creation is growing outside of yourself, not somebody physically molding you into something that you're going to be, right? I use the reference of the seed versus the sapling versus the tree. So I perceive it more as where you're saying with spirituality, it's an interaction. So that's how I perceive it, is it's creation. The interaction is that you're growing outside of yourself by interacting with yourself, because all the knowledge you seek is within you.
Yeah, exactly. Like that investigating and everything. Like, investigation is an interaction and not a transaction.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny again, because having looked up the definition of the two, is that all of the definitions I saw held the two words as synonymous, but we could break down the differences right there. Like, investigation is an interaction, not a transaction.
Yeah.
You can pay an investigator, but what does that get you? Like, you could go and have your palms read, which I would love to do. If anybody wants to give us like palm readings and stuff, that would be an awesome episode.
We're
But
still looking for someone who knows Vedic astrology. I have my chart, Adam. We could get you your chart. We would definitely love to have somebody read our charts on here.
yeah, man, we'll have like a candlelit show or something, and that would just be effing magnificent. Yeah, my dude, what do you think? You think we put a pin in it, all wrapped up?
Yeah, I think this was a well-rounded conversation. And again, I'm glad that the last episode we were able to go over archetypes and the principles finally. That way, like, we could discuss things more in a broader sense and not have to always be referencing back to, oh, this is what this means. That way people could go back to our last episode and watch it if you don't understand what the 7 hermetic principles were that we're talking about in this.
Yeah.
Again, these were terms that are going to come up, and we're going to do more episodes like that, where there's terms that are always going to come up throughout here, and we're going to cover them in an episode. That way, when we discuss them in other episodes like this, then you guys can reference that. But again, with this discussion, I feel like the spirits meant for us to not have that conversation, the last conversation,
Absolutely.
so we could have it this one.
Yeah.
And I feel like it was more well-rounded to have it as a separate episode than to have it as a continuation of one podcast.
Right. A lot of people, they would have like, oh, I like the beginning. And then other people would be like, where do I skip ahead to where they get to the other part? This way, They each have their own place. For sure.
And I like it. I like that, it wrapped up to that. It led into this. And I like that the episodes can definitely have the potential to go into other episodes. We still got to touch on the Glocka one, getting back to that.
Yeah, that is still going to be a deep dive. Like, and we're doing work on it all the time as it just interests us. And so we'll definitely put everything together and have like a nice curated kind of PowerPoint of a show.
The flat earth or anything like that we tied into. See, right now we're touching on Tartaria, so.
Yeah. Word. Well, all right, man. I think we leave it there, and everybody, thank you for listening. We'll see you on the flip side.
Don't forget to be on the lookout for the interdimensional bling, and bye, guys.
We're getting that one up. Adios.